Ibrahim Traoré is a Burkinabe military officer who has been interim leader of Burkina Faso since September 30, 2022 coup which ousted interim President Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba. At the age of 36, Traoré is currently the youngest serving president in the world. At the age of 36, he is already making changes affecting Africa. And he has already started ruffling feathers. All for the good and benefit of people of Burkina Faso. After taking power on September 30, 2022, Captain Ibrahim Traoré gave himself 2 to 3 months to improve the security situation in Burkina Faso, but a year later, the country is still the target of deadly jihadist attacks. At the time of the putsch, the country's second in 8 months, Captain Traoré had promised that resolving a few minor logistical problems and considerations within the army would enable him to regain control. In the space of a year, the new regime focused its efforts on strong security response to these attacks by groups linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, a massive recruitment of volunteers for the defense of the homeland, civilian auxiliaries to the army, purchases of drones and helicopters, neutralization of jihads, and trips by President Traoré to the field to motivate troops. 12 months later, we have to admit that the problem that justified Captain Traoré's eruption onto the national political scene is far from being resolved. Corruption is a widespread problem in Burkina Faso and presents business operating or planning to invest in the country with very high risks. Corruption is pervasive in all sectors of the economy and government. Burkina Faso belongs to the category of the world's poorest and least developed countries and is largely dependent on foreign donors for its economic development. Let us take a listen to this video.
The fight against terrorism is progressing. But we must recognize that there are certain areas in which things have not progressed. It's corruption, administrative slowness. It must be recognized. Things have not changed at this level because we gave ourselves time to raise awareness and talk to people so that they understand, both at the army level and at the civilian level. From this speech, you can see that Ibrahim Traoré's efforts this year will be focused on the fight against corruption and administrative slowness, which sometimes plague the government's actions. For him, the machine for the fight against corruption has started for this year 2024, and firmness will be required on proven cases of corruption and laxity in public administration. Everyone must do the mission for which they were recruited. Unfortunately, this is often not the case. And when we want to make redundancies, people pull texts from everywhere. You cannot take the texts of others and apply them to our context, added Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who said he was upset against certain practices in public administration. He denounced the propensity to systematically recruit firms for work, falling within the competence and obligations of public administration executives. According to the head of state, most of the recruited firms generally have connections with administration actors who, through indirect channels, offer their skills in return for undue remuneration. It's theft, it's cheating, and we are going to put an end to these practices. He was indignant. The president of the transition called for the activation of disciplinary councils in the various structures of the administration, so that sanctions are taken against unscrupulous agents, even if this should go as far as dismissal. He also announced major projects in the field of agriculture with the agro-pastoral and fisheries offensive with a view to achieving food security. The efforts of the transition are, according to him, part of the promotion of endogenous development and the fight for the cause of the most deprived in Burkinabe society. You know, I have said this and I will say it again. The criticism is not from the imperialists directly. It's from our brothers who benefited from the crimes, theft of resources, handouts, such as aid, loans and grants from Western-based financial institutions. How I wish today more Africans understood the complex geopolitical issues these two brothers, Assimi Goïta and Captain Ibrahim Traoré, are dealing with. But most importantly, I hope Africans will learn about the importance of standing behind and in support of your own when the path is clearly spelt out, and everyone understands what is at stake. If you go to the Ibrahim Traoré circle right now, there are people protecting the revolution in Burkina Faso. No one is paying them. They volunteer their services because they understand the choice that needs to be made between homeland and death. These two leaders and the populations of Mali and Burkina Faso serve as a template fit for adoption by all oppressed nations of Africa. Above all, we must support each other as Africans.
Which clearly details Ibrahim Traoré's top priority at the moment. Please may I ask you to subscribe and share. Let us continue. Ibrahim Traoré's arrival has raised great hopes among the population in view of the situation. A great deal of effort has been made on the ground to reconquer localities. The latter factor has thus pushed the government to pass new anti-corruption legislation, further broadening the anti-corruption legal framework of the country. Active and passive bribery, abuse of office, embezzlement, and other forms of corruption are criminalized under the Penal Code. However, weak enforcement of these laws, coupled with poor access to information, a culture of impunity, weak institutions, have made the fight against corruption more difficult. Gifts and facilitation payments are forbidden practices in Burkina Faso. Companies contend with a moderate to high corruption risks in interactions with the Burkina police. The police and gendarmerie are perceived to be among the most corrupt institutions in Burkina Faso. Investigations of corrupt practices and the abuse of the police are carried out effectively. Companies perceive the reliability of the police to protect them from crime and to enforce and order to be law. The Public Services Administration carries a moderate to high corruption risk to companies. Businesses perceive bribes and irregular payments to be widespread when applying for public utilities. On the other hand, only 1 in every 10 citizens surveyed report having paid a bribe to obtain a public service in the last 12 months, TI Africa Survey 2015. In general, public administrations are ineffective due to a lack of financial, human, and technical resources, and suffer from practices of clientelism and corruption. Burkina Faso's regulatory system is perceived to be transparent and consistent with international standards, ICS 2016. The cost and time required to register a business in Burkina Faso are lower compared to the regional average, DB 2017. Furthermore, the government has eased the process of starting a business by reducing the paid-in minimum capital required to register a company. Companies were able to see that, despite property rights and acquisition of property being adequately defined under the law, weaknesses in the judicial system complicate or prevent their implementation, BTI 2016. For instance, registering a property in Burkina Faso only requires 4 procedures, and yet it takes 67 days. An average which is higher than in other neighboring countries. The tax administration presents businesses with high corruption risks. Bribes and irregular payments are often exchanged in meetings with tax officials. Well over 1/3 of Burkina Faso citizens perceive tax officials to be very corrupt. Despite that the government offers a range of tax incentives and breaks to companies investing in the country, including exemptions from value-added tax on certain equipment, the tax system is complex and burdensome. Burkina Faso struggles with an informal sector. Despite that, the government has made strides to incorporate it into the formal economy by imposing a unique tax called the Contribution du Secteur Informel, CSI, in an informal sector companies and other small companies with an annual turnover of 15 million West African franc or less. Burkina Faso has established a legal anti-corruption framework, however, implementation is lacking and anti-corruption agencies lack enforcement powers. The Penal Code, in French, criminalizes corruption, embezzlement, abuse of office, extortion and influence peddling in the public sector. Facilitation payments are also criminalized under the Penal Code. Any public servants receiving a payment, gift or donation in return for performing a service, even if the service is due, is punished by 2 to 5 years imprisonment, and fined twice the value received. Following regime change with the end of the 30-year rule of Blaise Compaoré, the National Transitional Council passed a new anti-corruption law by greatly broadening the range of officials required to submit financial asset declarations, including the President, Prime Minister, members of Parliament. The law requires all public institutions to adopt codes of conduct promoting integrity and transparency. All public officials are required under the new law to declare gifts, donations, and other benefits received. Burkina Faso is a member of the West African Economic and Monetary Union, as well as the Intergovernment Action Group Against Money Laundering in West Africa, and has criminalized money laundering in accordance with these memberships by passing Law No. 26 concerning the fight against money laundering. Moreover, Burkina Faso has both signed and ratified the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption as well as the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. To cut corruption quickly, the president has asked the citizens to report to him directly whenever they see any form of corruption. Generals from Burkina Faso government have already visited Rwanda. I reckon the major talks must have on how to beat corruption. Rwanda has no corruption. Period. The conflict in Burkina Faso has deep-rooted causes that have contributed to its escalation. Here are some of the factors. 1. Historical marginalization and inequality. Burkina Faso has a history of marginalization of certain ethnic groups and regions. Economic disparities, unequal access to resources, and limited development opportunities have fueled grievances. 2. Ethnic and religious tensions. The country is home to various ethnic groups, and tensions exist between them. Religious extremism has exacerbated divisions, with Islamist armed groups exploiting these fault lines. 3. Socioeconomic challenges. Poverty, lack of education, and limited employment prospects contribute to vulnerability. Young people, especially in rural areas, face few opportunities, making them susceptible to radicalization. 4. Weak government and corruption. Ineffective governance, corruption, and weak state institutions have eroded public trust. The government's inability to address social and economic issues has fueled discontent. 4. External factors. Burkina Faso shares borders with Mali and Niger, both facing similar challenges. Spillover effects from neighboring conflict have impacted Burkina Faso. 5. Climate change and resources scarcity. Environmental degradation, droughts, and resources contributes to conflict. 6. Armed insurgency and militancy. Islamic armed groups exploit the above factors to recruit fighters and gain influence. 7. Political instability and coup attempts. Frequent political upheavals, including military coup, have destabilized the country. These disruptions weaken the government's ability to address underlying issues. In summary, the conflict in Burkina Faso is a complex interplay of historical, socio-economic, ethnic, and external factors, compounded by weak governance and armed insurgency. Addressing these root causes requires multifaceted efforts, including development, governance reforms, and regional cooperation. We wish Ibrahim Traoré and his government all the best in building Burkina Faso for the best for all the citizens and Africa. Thank you so much for your time. I value your support very much indeed. Please subscribe, like and share the video. Thank you.